If you're a freelancer using AI tools to deliver client work faster, and honestly, who isn't at this point? There is a $4,000 mistake sitting quietly inside your current contract, and you probably have no idea it's there. I finished a full project in 3 days, delivered everything the client asked for, sent the invoice, and then watched that client dispute the payment, keep the work, and walk away clean. My standard freelance agreement had exactly zero language about who owns AI-generated drafts. So legally, they had a pretty solid argument, and I had a pretty solid lesson. Here's what's wild about this situation. I'm not some rookie who forgot to read a contract template. I had a contract, a real one, with paragraphs and everything, but it was written in 2022, before I was using AI for anything, and it had exactly the kind of IP clause that made total sense back then. All original work created by the contractor becomes property of the client upon full payment. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the word original is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. And in 2026, a lawyer with a grudge can argue that AI-generated content isn't original work created by you at all. So today we're going to do 3 things. First, I'm going to show you exactly why your current contract is probably broken for the AI era. Second, I'm going to walk you through the 5 specific clauses you need to add right now. And third, because I know some of you are going to ask, I'll tell you the fastest and cheapest way to get these clauses into a real document without paying a lawyer $300 an hour to explain what indemnification means. There's a reason I'm covering this in May of 2026 specifically, and that reason involves a regulation that just became fully enforceable. We'll get to that. Let's talk about the scale of this problem first, because I want you to understand this isn't just my bad luck. Contract-related disputes in the freelance world have jumped by 47% since 2023, and the researchers who tracked that number point directly at AI as the accelerant. Think about what changed. 3 years ago, you wrote the deliverable. You own the creative process. The IP question was pretty straightforward. Now you're prompting a model, editing the output, maybe running it through 2 or 3 tools, and handing over a final document that has your fingerprints on it, but also kinda has OpenAI's fingerprints on it, and your client's lawyer's fingerprints on it if they want to get creative. The old contract language just doesn't map to this workflow. Serious. And here's the part that actually kept me up at night after my dispute. There's a tool called Lexitize that has analyzed over 10,000 freelance contracts, and they report that the average savings per risky clause caught is about $3,200 per clause, which means the average freelance contract isn't just missing one landmine, it's missing several. And every single one of those gaps is a potential dispute waiting for a bad faith client to find it. The gig economy now involves over 83 million Americans, generating about $1.5 trillion in income. That is an enormous amount of money flowing through contracts that were mostly written before anyone knew what a prompt was. Okay, so let's get into the actual clauses, because that's why you're here and I respect your time. I'm going to call these the 5 AI contract shields, and I want you to think of them as a stack. Each one covers a different angle of exposure. The first one is the IP ownership clause, and this is the one that cost me $4,000, so we're starting here. Your old IP clause probably says something like, work product created by contractor. The problem is created by is legally ambiguous when a language model is involved. Courts haven't fully settled this, but the argument that AI output isn't created by a human contractor is real, and it's being made. Here's the language I now use, and you can adapt this directly. Something like, all deliverables, including any content generated with the assistance of artificial intelligence tools and subsequently reviewed, edited, and curated by contractor, are considered work product of contractor and shall transfer to client upon receipt of full payment. The key phrase is reviewed, edited, and curated by contractor. That establishes your human creative contribution to the final output, which is what gives you a defensible ownership claim. You're not pretending the AI didn't exist. You're documenting that your judgment and expertise shaped the final product. That's actually true, and it's also legally meaningful. Now here's where it gets interesting and slightly uncomfortable. Some clients are going to push back on this clause. They're going to say, wait, if you used AI, why should I pay your full rate? And look, that's actually a fair question, and you should have an answer ready. The answer is, you're paying for my judgment, my quality control, my prompt engineering expertise, and my guarantee that the output is accurate and appropriate for your use case. You're not paying me to type faster. You're paying me to know what good looks like and to make sure you get it. That reframe is important, and it's worth having that conversation before a contract dispute forces it. Shield number 2 is the data privacy clause, and this one is not optional anymore. It's legally required in a growing number of situations. Here's the scenario nobody thinks about until it's too late. You're working on a project for a client. They share internal documents with you for context. You paste some of that content into your AI tool to help with research or drafting, and that content potentially gets used to train a model. Your client finds out. Now you have a confidentiality breach, potential GDPR or CCPA exposure depending on what the data contained, and a very unhappy client. I've seen this happen. It's not hypothetical. Whispers, the clause you need here is what lawyers call a no training, no commingling provision. It goes something like this. Contractor agrees not to input client confidential information into any AI tool that uses submitted data for model training purposes, and will maintain clear separation between client data and contractors' personal AI workflows. That second part, the commingling piece, is actually the sneaky one. If you use the same ChatGPT account for personal projects and client work, you've already got a potential problem. Separate accounts, separate workflows. It sounds paranoid until the day it saves you. This brings me to the regulation I mentioned at the top of the video, because the timing here actually matters. The EU AI Act, which was adopted back in 2024, just became fully enforceable as of August 2026. And if you work with any European clients, or if your client has European customers, this applies to you. The Act requires freelancers who use generative AI to comply with transparency and labeling obligations. In plain English, you may be legally required to disclose when AI was used in creating a deliverable. Your contract should address this proactively, not reactively. Add a line that says AI tools may be used in the creation of deliverables, and that contractor will disclose specific tools upon client request. Shield number 3 is the liability cap for AI output errors, and this is the one that most freelancers think they don't need until they absolutely need it. Here's the scenario. You use an AI tool to help draft a piece of content. The AI confidently states something that turns out to be factually wrong, a regulatory claim, a statistic, a legal interpretation. Your client publishes it. Someone notices. There's a complaint, maybe a correction, maybe something worse. Your client comes back to you. And if your contract doesn't limit your liability for AI-generated inaccuracies that you reasonably reviewed, you could be on the hook for damages that dwarf your original invoice. There's actually a documented case of a service company that got hit with penalties because an AI-generated deliverable included an unsubstantiated regulatory compliance claim. The AI vendor's contract had liability limitations that protected the vendor. The service company, which is the equivalent of the freelancer in this story, was left holding the full bag. That is the exact situation your liability clause needs to prevent. The language here is something like, contractor's total liability for any claims arising from this agreement shall not exceed the total fees paid under this agreement, and contractor shall not be liable for inaccuracies in AI-generated content that were not reasonably detectable through professional review. That last phrase is doing important work. It acknowledges you reviewed it, but it sets a reasonable standard. Shield number 4 is the scope definition clause, and honestly, this one predates AI. Scope creep has been murdering freelancers since the dawn of the invoice. But AI makes it worse in a specific and sneaky way. When you deliver work fast, like 3 days fast, clients sometimes assume that speed means you have infinite capacity and that revisions are basically free. They don't think about the fact that your AI workflow still requires your time, your judgment, and your expertise. They just see a fast turnaround and think, cool, can you also do this other thing? And if your contract doesn't define exactly what's included and what triggers a new invoice, you'll find yourself doing 2 projects for the price of 1. The fix here is brutally specific scope language, not content creation services. That's a blank check. Instead, deliverables under this agreement include specifically X, Y, and Z, as defined in the attached project brief. Any work outside this scope, including additional revisions beyond 2 rounds, additional formats, or additional topics, will be quoted separately and require written approval before work begins. And then you actually attach the project brief. I know that sounds like extra work up front, but it is so much less work than a dispute later. Also, and this is the part people skip, define what revision means. 1 round of revisions means 1 consolidated list of changes, not 17 separate emails over 3 weeks. Sarcastic, shield number 5 is the payment and kill fee clause, And I know, you've heard this before. Get a deposit, have payment terms, blah blah. But here's what most freelance contract templates get wrong about this in the AI era specifically. Because AI lets you work faster, you might complete 50 or 70% of a project before the client has even reviewed the first deliverable. Which means if they cancel at that point, you've done most of the work and your standard 50% deposit doesn't cover your actual time. You need a kill fee that's tied to completion percentage, not just a flat number. The clause I use now says something like, in the event of project cancellation by client after work has commenced, client agrees to pay a kill fee equal to the percentage of work completed at time of cancellation, as documented by contractor, plus the initial deposit. Work completed shall be transferred to client upon receipt of kill fee payment. That last sentence is important. You're not holding the work hostage. You're just ensuring you get paid for what you did before you hand it over. It's reasonable, it's fair, and it gives you something to point to instead of having an awkward conversation from a position of zero use. Okay, so now you've got 5 clauses. Let's talk about actually getting them into a document, because I know some of you are looking at your current contracts right now and feeling mildly horrified. The good news is you don't need to spend $300 an hour on a lawyer to do this. Although for high-value projects, I'd still recommend having a lawyer review your template at least once. There are AI-powered contract tools that can generate professional freelance agreements for as little as $19, and some of them can cut document creation time by up to 90% compared to starting from scratch. Tools like Any, DraftBot Pro, and Bit.ai are all worth looking at for this. Here's my actual workflow for this. I have a base contract template that a lawyer reviewed once. Cost me about $400 for that review, which I've already saved back many times over. Then I use an AI tool to customize it for each new client and project type. I also run every contract I receive from a client through an AI contract review tool before I sign anything. Lexitize is one option. They've analyzed over 10,000 freelance contracts and can flag risky terms in minutes. The point is you're using AI to protect yourself from AI-era contract gaps, which is either very clever or very on-brand for 2026, depending on your perspective. Let me tell you about Marcus, because his situation is a good contrast to mine. Marcus is a solo content strategist who started adding AI to his workflow in early 2025, about the same time I did. But Marcus actually updated his contracts before he started using AI tools on client work. Not because he's smarter than me, but because he'd heard a horror story from someone in his network and got spooked into doing the boring paperwork. When a client tried to dispute ownership of an AI-assisted strategy document 6 months later, Marcus pulled out his contract, pointed to the IP clause, and the dispute was resolved in about 48 hours. His invoice got paid. He moved on. That's the difference between a $4,000 lesson and a $0 inconvenience. Now, I want to be honest about something, because I said I would be. These clauses are not magic. A determined bad faith client with a good lawyer can make your life difficult regardless of what your contract says. What these clauses do is change the math of a dispute. Without them, a client who wants to avoid paying has a reasonable legal argument, and you have nothing. With them, a client who wants to avoid paying has to fight through specific, documented language, and most of the time, that's enough friction to make them decide it's not worth it. I've seen this work for most freelancers who've updated their contracts. Not everyone, but most. Excited. Here's the part that actually surprised me when I started digging into this. McKinsey's latest AI report, published just a few weeks ago, argues that the productivity payoff from AI is real but conditional. The condition is that your workflows have to be redesigned to capture the value, not just bolted onto old systems. And I think contracts are the most overlooked part of that workflow redesign. Everyone talks about prompt engineering and tool stacks, but nobody talks about the legal infrastructure that makes it safe to actually use those tools with paying clients. Your contract is part of your AI workflow. It just happens to be the part that protects you when everything else goes sideways. There's one more thing I want to flag before we wrap up, and it's the misclassification risk that almost nobody in the freelance AI space is talking about. The AI industry is increasingly facing class action lawsuits for misclassifying workers as independent contractors, particularly for data annotation and AI training roles. If you're doing any kind of AI-adjacent work where a client has significant control over your process, your tools, your hours, or your outputs, you need a clause that explicitly defines your independent contractor status and the degree of autonomy you maintain. This isn't paranoia. It's just documenting reality. You set your own hours. You use your own tools. You deliver results, not labor. Say that in the contract. So let's do a quick recap, because we covered a lot of ground and I want this to actually stick. 5 shields for your AI-era freelance contract. 1. IP ownership clause that covers AI-assisted work and documents your human creative contribution. 2. Data privacy clause with a no training, no commingling provision. 3. Liability cap for AI output errors that sets a reasonable professional review standard. 4. Brutally specific scope definition with a clear revision policy. 5. Kill fee tied to completion percentage, not a flat number. Each one of these covers a different way a client can leave you holding the bag, and together they make your contract actually match the work you're doing in 2026. Here is the one thing I want you to do today, not this week, not when you get around to it, today. Open your current freelance contract template and search for the word original. If your IP clause uses that word without defining what it means in the context of AI-assisted work, you have the same gap that cost me $4,000. Spend 30 minutes updating that one clause using the language I described earlier. Just that one change will cover your biggest exposure. The other 4 clauses matter too, but start with the one that's already bitten someone you know. And if you want to see how I actually structure my full AI workflow, the tools, the prompts, the systems, that's the next video.